Okay, as Tomasz said, we're going to start. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Hello, Tomasz. How are you?
Excellent. Thank you. Yourself?
I'm very well, thank you. Okay, so from the beginning, first off, I'd like to thank everybody for attending this webinar. It's going to be about building an optimized WordPress server on DigitalOcean. Host today is going to be Codable's founder, CTO, and an all-round good guy, Tomasz Zaman, who you see here with the Superman t-shirt. A little bit about Codable. It's the first, or number one, online outsourcing service for WordPress. We've been around since 2017. We have over 300 plus hand-picked experts who provide some of the best WordPress expertise in the business. So when you run out of knowledge or time, 99.9% of the projects are rated with 5 stars, which is why 80% of our clients return with more work within the first month. Tomasz, take it away.
Thank you, Chris. So yes, I'd like to thank you everybody for attending this webinar. Actually, it's my first webinar, so I apologize for any mishaps in advance. So today, as Chris said, we're going to talk about building a highly optimized server for WordPress on DigitalOcean. So DigitalOcean, most of you hopefully know who they are and what they do. They're the world's fastest growing cloud computing platform focused on simplifying cloud infrastructure for software developers and startups. The company itself is scored in New York City with 12 data centers around the world. And the new generation of startups, including ours, leverage their cloud infrastructure to rapidly deploy and scale their production environments and distributed applications. We've also partnered with WP Rocket. They are one of the most powerful caching plugins recognized as the most powerful caching plugin by WordPress expert, and the plugin itself is quickly becoming the de facto standard for highly optimized WordPress websites. That being said, let's start. So I won't go through the process of actually creating an account on DigitalOcean. You may do it after this webinar on your own. So once you have your account on digitalocean.com, also make sure to put in your payment details. And as a gift from DigitalOcean, we will be giving away a $15 coupon code for DigitalOcean, and also we will be giving out a 20% discount code for WP Rocket. So once you're in the DigitalOcean dashboard, here's the droplets list, and what we need to do is create a new droplet. You can already see that I have one here, which is the one I've been doing my last practice run on. So all we have to do now is create a new droplet. Of course, DigitalOcean supports many different moving parts that you might need, such as custom firewalls and mounted drives, but we won't go over those as part of the webinar. So I usually tend to, when creating new server instances, we need to choose which image we want to build our instance from. And I'm always in favor of Debian, which is one of the more kind of established and reputable Linux distribution online. In fact, even Ubuntu is based on Debian, but Debian is a bit more kind of low level, but not as low level as some of the other ones, such as FreeBSD. So we're just going to select the latest Debian version, and we're going to run with what DigitalOcean is giving us, and that is, the one for $20 a month, which comes with 2 gigabytes of RAM and 40 gigabytes of SSD disk. This should be plentiful for normal websites or even some simple e-commerce, WooCommerce shops. But in general, it's a good starting point. Now, the good thing is you can always resize your instance or droplet if the one you have is proving to be too small for your needs. Next, we're going to skip the block storage and we're just going to choose the data center region. Now, when you're considering the data center, you should first and foremost always consider where your visitors are from and choose the one that is nearest to your target audience, so to speak. So since I'm from Europe, I'll be choosing my imaginary WordPress, well, not imaginary, we'll actually build this one, will be, let's imagine it will be intended for European audience, so Amsterdam is a good choice. It doesn't really matter. So most of providers have different zones within a particular region. So as you can see here, we have Amsterdam and it has zones 2 and 3. It normally doesn't matter which one you pick. When this comes into being useful, is when you want to do any kind of fallback or high availability or replication. Then what you might want to do is have one server in one zone and the other server in the second zone. So if one zone goes down, because usually it's if hosting providers have issues, it's usually related to one zone which is physically separate from another one. So that's when zones come into being more important. Now we'll also not choose any of the additional options because we don't need them for the purpose of this webinar. But we will update we will select my SSH key, which I created in advance. We only need one droplet, and let's name it, I don't know, let's say server 2. You might want to choose a more imaginative name. Usually, well, at least I tend to name my servers, by stars sometimes, like, I don't know, some star.codable.io or whatever, just to name them, or name them by what they do, or let your imagination go loose. It doesn't really matter much how you name your servers. So our server is now ready. So we can now we can now connect to the server and start doing our work. Now most of this webinar will take place on the inside the terminal or the shell, or so be sure to set it up or have it ready. For Mac users and Linux users, it's easy. Windows users usually need some kind of external software to connect to Linux-based shells, but yeah, it's all the same at the end, I guess. So now what I'll do is I'll copy the IP for this server that was given to me by DigitalOcean, and what I'll do, I'll just SSH onto it. I don't need to. There are no passwords involved here. And that is because when I was creating the droplet, I chose to use my SSH key or my RSA key, the public key. So now we don't need any kind of passwords. Of course, if you want, there are always options to tweak SSH settings on the server for increased security, but this is good enough for what we need. The first step, if you want to tinker with the security on your own, I urge you to go into DigitalOcean firewalls, and maybe as a first line of defense, just protect the port 22 to be accessible only from your current IP. So now that we have our server here, the first thing is always the best to update it, because all these droplets are at first created by or from an image, and that image was probably built, you know, not that very same day, so it may be outdated. So the first thing I usually tend to do when having new droplets is just run the apt-get update, and followed by apt-get upgrade, and confirm when they ask if I'm sure of it. Of course, I'm sure of it. The first thing we need to take care of on a newly created droplet is creating a swap. A swap is basically a version, if you will, of memory of your RAM on disk. Not a version, but an extension. This means that if the server runs out of the memory, you know, and if the server has nowhere to write this temporary data to, it will start to be really unstable. Services won't work, and it can't recover on its own, because the system programs that are tasked with recovering failed programs don't have enough memory. So it usually leads in all kind of issues. So let's create this, the swap file first. Now, as per DigitalOcean documentation, actually, let me open it real quick. It says that on SSD disks, it's actually recommended not to use swap. But I tend to do it always, regardless, because it's still better to have some swap ready and not use it than not having it there and then your system crashes. I would advise that you always monitor your swap to see if it's used, and if it is used, then that is kind of an indicator you need to increase the size of your droplet, at least when it comes to memory. Now, most of the commands I'll do here today, I'll paste from a document I prepared earlier, which I'll share with you at the end of the webinar as well. And that is just because we can save a bit of time by, you know, so that you don't watch me typing, but rather follow what I'm doing. So first we're going to do we're going to create a swap file. You don't necessarily need to know what each of these commands do. I would urge you, if you don't know and you're curious, to check them out. But this fallocate, we're just going to use it once, and you might want to Google it afterwards. Now the second command, chmod, we'll use it a lot actually, and it's used to set permissions on file. So Linux-based systems have 3 levels of permissions. The owner, or 3 groupings of permissions: what the owner can do, what the group can do, and what everybody else can do with a particular file or a directory. Let's see what we did on this swap file. So if you can see that, 0600 means that only the owner can read and write to the file, and the owner being root and root is the ultimate master of the instance, so to speak. So now we need to make it into a swap file, and of course turn it on. As I said, you might want to Google these commands. We're just doing this one-off, and I always do it one-off and then just forget all about it. And we also need to update our fs tab. Our fs tab file is actually it actually tracks all the different disks. Now, swap file is not a disk in itself, but it's very similar to one. And what I did here, you can see I echoed what is in this double quotes into the file. So echo something, and then two greater than just symbolizes that you want to put something into a file. And if you use 2, it means just append it. If I used only 1 greater than, then it would just replace everything in it, and that we don't want that. So now we can verify that our swap that our swap is actually working by running this command. So we're just, cat just means just, display what's in the file. So if I do cat, it will just show me the contents of proc meminfo file. And if I notice swap total and swap free, we're basically good. So swap is registered and working. You might also, and this is one of the more useful commands in Linux, I use it a lot, is free -m, which gives you the amount of memory that you have. So as you can see here, we have total, as in physical memory, 2 gigabytes and 1.5 or something free, and we have 1 gigabyte, sorry, of swap storage. Ideally, this should always be like this. So 0 of it should be used for optimal performance. If you see it's used here, then as I said, you might want to increase your droplet. Now going forward, we'll also need a couple of packages or system packages such as Git. So let's install them now. So we need. I personally tend to use other shell than bash, which is the default. So we'll also install a ZSH shell or Zshell. Now this is the next step is optional, but I like to do it anyway because I like to, like any good, I would say, artisan or craftsman, they like their workspace neat, and I like my workspace neat as well. Even if my workspace is Linux shell, but I like it to look nice. So I always install Zshell. As I said, this step is perfectly optional, but yeah, if you want it to look nice, then I strongly recommend this shell and Blink's. We need an S here, and Blink's theme. So now that I changed ZSHRC, which is the configuration file, we can source that file. Source just means basically think of it as a reload of your shell. So we'll just source it, and there we go, much nicer. Now just clear, so we start from here. I also tend to, for example, if we repeat this last, you can see that there are no numbers in Vim. It's really hard to work without numbers because usually you navigate the files when you edit them. Well, I use Vim. You can use VI or Nano or other editors. I tend to use at least some basic settings for Vim, and they're actually really basic. So I'll just paste a couple of things here. I won't go through them. All you have to do is, let me just clean this up real quick. Here we go. Yeah, here we go. So if I do Vim again, yeah, let's do this. Okay. So yeah, just to quickly get our Vim display the numbers, and it should. Okay, so now the first thing we need on our server is Nginx, of course, the web server. So what we'll do is first we'll try to install it, and what I'll do is I'll investigate what the current apt cache shows us. Think of apt cache as a cache for our apt repository. So when you do apt-get update, then your server will download repository information, all that it needs to actually fetch the packages or the software will need. Now, as I said, our images are not always up to date. So what we need to do is sometimes resort to external releases or external providers. Look to their websites to see whether they have newer versions. And in fact, Nginx does have their own repository, so we might want to check it out. And it shows where it is and where it's pointed at. So you can see here, we're only interested in this first line, actually, deb, and then the package path, and then the code name and Nginx. Code name is actually the version of your operating system, and we can check out our version by writing cat, as in cat, etc, asterisk release. This will give us, asterisk means just whatever, it's a wild card. So it will give us, all the files that have minus release in etc. It will just print them out, and you can see the code name for our Debian version is stretch. So what we need to do is replace the instructions here with stretch. So the normal location for our custom repositories is usually etc apt sources list.d. It's currently empty, so let's add this instruction, deb codename Nginx, into it. Now I have it also ready because I've done it before, and I'll just run this command. So what I've done here, this is all one command. It's delimited into 2 lines with a backslash, but for Linux it's all one command. You can delimit longer commands with backslash just for convenience, because they're easier to read in the documentations. So if I list this folder or directory, I'll see Nginx, and let's just verify that it has what it needs, and let's check it out against the instructions. So deb packages Debian stretch Nginx, it's correct. Now the other thing we also need to do, and we always need to do it when we have custom repositories, is install signing keys. We usually need to download the signing keys, and we do it with this. We do it with this command. We usually download it and add it to our apt via our apt key command to our apt repositories. Signing keys are used to verify that the package we're installing is actually by the author or from the source it claims to be. So it's kind of self-verification mechanism. And now that we have our Nginx repository set and the signing key set, we can go ahead and install Nginx. Now here you can see I chained 2 commands together. I did apt-get update because we don't have the actual packages yet. We just have the pointing link, sort of. So now by updating our own cache on the server itself, we will get the right information, all that we need, and then we'll install it. And I just added a -y so that it doesn't ask us, am I sure? Because of course I'm sure that I want to do it. It should take only a couple of seconds here. Our Nginx is now running, but it's not running. It's installed, but it's probably not running yet. So let's just check it out. Debian and most Linux distributions have systemd, which is a service or process manager for Linux in a nutshell, and you call it with a service and then a service name and then an operation you want to do on it. So what we can do now is service Nginx start, and now if we check the status again, you can see that our Nginx is running. We can also do ps-aux, and we'll get the whole list of services that are running on our server, but we're only interested in Nginx. So you can always filter out your commands by grep. So the pipe means that anything that the one command returns, the pipe character, this vertical line, means that whatever this command returns should be piped through, which is why it's vertical pipe, sort of. And we should grep for Nginx. So basically, in this sense, grep behaves as a filter, sort of. So you can see now that our Nginx is indeed running. So now it's time to actually try to access our web server. I usually check for the IP by typing ifconfig, and usually the ETH0 interface will have the right IP. So in our case, this is the IP we're after. So let's try it, and voila, perfect. So our Nginx is now running. So now the next thing to do is to install PHP, of course, because we need something to handle our PHP files. Nginx does not do that on its own. So we'll do exactly the same thing as we did with Nginx. We're going to use a custom repository. Now, PHP themselves do not have a Debian repository, so another has come into popularity, and it's by a developer named Andrei Suri. So we'll just use their package repository, and as I said, it's quite popular one. It sounds awkward that it's not from an official entity, but it's perfectly fine. It's always updated. You can always find the latest versions there, and kind of, it's the industry preferred way, so to speak. So what I'll do is I'll paste in this command, which is from suri.org for our stretch, of course, because stretch is our code name. You can recognize the command is very similar to to what we did with Nginx. And also the next thing we need is the actual key. So now that we also have the key, we can install everything that we'll need to run to install our PHP 7.1.9, I think is the latest stable. I'll paste in a longer command. Again, I delimited the command by backslashes. So you can see I'm installing ImageMagick, which WordPress uses, and a couple of PHP modules that WordPress uses in one way or another. If you forget any of them, don't worry. It's always possible to install them separately or additionally if you need them, for example. So now we'll be installing these packages. As you can see, installing these packages is pretty fast because all these repositories have packages pre-built for our version. So somebody already compiled it, so we don't have to, which is why the process is quite fast. So now that the PHP is gonna be installed, what we need to do is actually configure Nginx to use the PHP. I'm a big fan of PHP FPM. It's very nice that it's part of the official bundle, so to speak. So yeah, we'll use it going forward. Like Nginx, PHP FPM is also a process. So what we need to do is have a way of them speaking to one another. So especially Nginx talking to PHP FPM. But for now, let's first test whether our PHP is actually, or PHP FPM is actually working, and we do that by modifying the Nginx configuration. But first, what we'll do is we'll change the user under which Nginx runs, and it will be www-data. This is the kind of industry preferred or accepted user and group. So we'll use that, and also PHP runs with it, and it's always a good idea to have at least to consider the users and groups that processes are running under, because any kind of mismatches between those will end up in all sorts of problems, specifically permissions related. So it's a good idea to have Nginx run as www-data. And also what we can do is here is a tiny optimization and use auto for worker processes, which just means that Nginx will automatically create workers that will correspond to the amount of workers that will correspond to the amount of processor cores on the droplet or the instance. So if we have 4 cores, it will create 4 workers. Now let's actually go to EDC Nginx. Now you may have noticed that I do a lot of work in ETC, and in fact we'll do majority of our work in ETC because ETC is actually the preferred storage of configuration files on Linux systems. So Nginx has its own, PHP has its own, and other software will install. Everything will be happening here. So as you noticed, when we open this file, on line 31, it says include conf.d//*conf. So it means it will automatically include all the conf files that are in this conf.d directory, which means that we should definitely have a look in there. So you can see here is the conf.d directory, and let's go in and list what's in. So we have our default configuration, and let's play around with it for a second to see, to try and get our PHP running properly, or better yet, Nginx communicating with PHP properly. So what I'll do is I'll open this file, and I'll change this to be a kind of a invalid value. This is invalid, but this is actually the preferred way to get a catch-all kind of virtual host. So it means that everything that is not the domain, if somebody will just type in the IP, this virtual host will trigger. So while we're in this file, let's try to make the necessary changes. So the changes are, let's set the number. Here it's index PHP that I should add, so that so that Nginx knows that it should parse PHP as the first thing. So if you have all of these three files in a directory, index.php will be shared or looked at first. Then what we need to do is uncomment all these lines. And what I'll also do is change this one. Now this one is quite tricky, but usually it's the most important one because inclusion of other files may fail, and other errors might occur if you get this one wrong. So as you can see, I just replaced with it document root rather than /scripts. It also depends on what kind of project you have, but for WordPress, this version works. Also, I'll change the root to check another directory because we don't have root HTML. So what I'll put in is user share Nginx HTML. Now, don't worry too much about this directory. It's just for testing purposes to see whether it will be working correctly or not. So I can now save and quit file. Now in Vim has two modes. I won't go too much into Vim, but it's usually when you press when you do something. So it has a command mode and it has a edit mode. Command mode means if I press J now, it will go one line down. If I press K, it goes one line up. So I'm typing J and K, but it's not actually typing them. In order to do that, for example, I have to press A because A stands for append. So if I press A and then K, I put it in. And you can see down, it says insert mode. So in insert mode, I actually write to the buffer, to the file. But when I press escape, then the insert is off. Then I can do all sorts of manipulations. So if I do colon and W and Q, it means colon, W for write as in save, and quit, right? So I've saved and quit file, and that's it. Now what I'll do is we've done Nginx configuration update, so we need to restart or reload Nginx. So let's reload it. But before we reload it, it's always smart to do a config test. You can see I've apparently done an error. If I didn't run the config test, it means that my Nginx wouldn't start and my website would be inaccessible. So always before you restart Nginx, run a config test. It only takes a couple of seconds to see whether it's okay or not. And you can see by this error that it's somewhere around the line 32, and you can see what I did here. I forgot a semicolon, which Nginx needs. So if I try config test now, everything is fine. So now I can reload Nginx. And what can we do now? Let's try in our browser whether it works. Well, it still works, obviously, because I've forgotten something. And I've forgotten to try a PHP file in this directory. So what I'll do is I'll go to this directory. Oh, sorry about that. And let me put index PHP in, and we'll just do it PHP info, and we'll just do this. Okay, so now, an error. So if we get an error, the best place to look is always in var log, /var/log. So let's go into /var/log. This is where most of the Linux logs are, if not all. And let's see what we have in here. So we do have an Nginx directory. So let's go to Nginx directory. And we can see error log. So let's, cat it out. It's a short log. So cat just means displayed out to us. And the failed connection refused. This means that Nginx wasn't able to connect to PHP FPM. That PHP FPM or whatever is listening or not listening refused to be connected to. So what we need to do now is we need to go to PHP configuration and make sure it's listening on the port 9000, which we set in Nginx. So let's go to, let's go to the FPM configuration, and sometimes we don't exactly know in what file a particular settings may be, especially with PHP and FPM, both of them. They're sometimes all over the place. So what we can do is we can grep for them. Now grep just means look for a particular piece, a string or piece of code, if you will. So what we'll do is grep recursively. So everything in this directory, we want to find something that says listen, for example. So this command says recursively search for listen from within this directory, which is what dot means. Dot means current directory, which you can see just above here. So you can see that it returned multiple files or multiple occurrences within the same file. So it must be this file that we need to look at. So let's try this file, and let's search for listen. Now in Vim, searching means you have to press a / and then listen, and then just press N as in the next. Okay, the next occurrence. I'm just pressing N here. Here it is. You can see listen is here on a socket, but I set it to listen on port. Now, if you ask different system administrators, they'll disagree which one is better. Socket usually, Linux sockets are usually faster. But when it comes to Nginx and PHP FPM, they don't scale as well, which is why I actually personally prefer to use ports. So what I always do when I edit configuration files, I find it useful to just comment down to the default, so I can always return to it and then modify it in a new line. And I'll do this as we go along more. So we need to listen to IP6 port 9000. So basically, this just means local host in IP6. It'll work fine. You could also put local host. I prefer this notation. Whichever you choose is fine, as long as the port is correct and it points to local host. So in our case, the port is 9000. So with that, we've updated the settings, and now of course we need to restart PHP FPM itself or reload it. The difference between, you'll see me reloading a lot but not restarting. Reloading means that the software will keep running while it reloads the configuration in, as opposed to restarting. Because if somebody makes a request to your website, but you're in the middle of restarting, then the request will be dropped and they'll see an error. Versus when you reload, it will take maybe, you know, a second more, but they will get the response back. So now let's just see that it's actually running fine, that I didn't make any mistakes, and it is. So now our Nginx and PHP are running just fine. And now let's check whether we see, yeah, perfect. So it is working. Now you don't want to test it like this. You don't want the whole world to see your server configuration. So it's a good practice to actually remove the file or just put something else in. Oops, sorry, index PHP. So let's do echo hi like this, and we're good. Perfect. So now our server is configured for Nginx and PHP, but we're actually not there yet to set up WordPress. We need to do a couple of things before we get there. The first thing to do, we need to set up a mailer, or what they're also known as MTAs, or mail transfer agents. Basically, if you have your instances elsewhere than on DigitalOcean, like Google Cloud or any other provider, your emails might work out of the box, but they might also not. The whole system is very fragile because the port that mail transfers are used is 25, and it gets abused a lot for spamming purposes. So many providers block the port by default. So what we'll do is we'll install Exim, which is, you know, the agent to send the emails, but then we will configure it to use an external provider. And my external provider of choice for this tutorial or webinar is SendGrid, but you might also want to use, I don't know, Mailgun or Mandrill. What you need from them basically is a username or password, or more commonly an API key that comes in a username password pair. So what we'll do, what I just done, I installed Exim 4, which is a mail transfer engine, and as usually it has its configuration in etc /exim 4. So in here, we're interested in two files really, the password.client and update exim. So what we will do here is, we'll first edit the password file. As you can see here, it gives you an example on how you have to structure the credentials. These are the API credentials for your service provider, email service provider of choice. In my case, I'm using SendGrid, so the whole thing is in this form. So the first is smtp.sendgrid.net, then a colon, then the username, which in SendGrid's case is always API key, and then another colon, and then the password or the actual API key. Now, don't worry, I am exposing my API key here, but it was built just temporarily for the purpose of this webinar, so it won't work for long. So now I can save and quit this file. And the next thing I have to do is also edit this second file, update exim, with the configuration that I need for the emails to be sent out. I'll just paste the configuration here because it's too much to go through it all. Yeah, you might want to read the documentation of what each of these means. But this setup has been working for me for a long time. Basically, this is a smart host version, which means we're not configuring our server to receive, but rather just send emails. Now, one more note I'd like to make here. Going forward, I will use a domain I own for the purpose of this webinar called Nevermint. So I'll put it in here, and you will, whenever you see me use nevermint.com, I'm just using a domain that I don't use for these kind of purposes. So I'll do nevermint.com here, and you will probably see me put nevermint.com in other places. So now I've updated the settings, and as I said, if you want to know more about them, read the official documentation. And now I need to run a command which ends up with a conf, oddly enough, but it does. So this command, it comes installed with Xim, will actually update it. So in order to test it, what I have to do is run a command like this. So I have to echo the body of and I have to pipe it into the mail, and yeah, you can see the structure here. So if I do like this, I will receive an email from the server. And in fact, I did on a separate screen, I could see it coming in. So basically, we're not sending email directly from the server, we're sending it through SendGrid in this case. Now that our emails are properly up and running, or the mail transfer agent, it's time to install Redis. Redis is really useful for transient storage, and it, from what I experienced so far, is that it significantly improves the WordPress admin screen's loading time. So it's always basically on every new install, WordPress install, that's the first thing I usually do. There's also a tutorial on setting up Redis on DigitalOcean, which I'll show you now. So the difference is, like I said earlier, we wanted Nginx and PHP to be the latest version, but for Redis, since it's used only for caching, it doesn't really matter. So what I did is I just installed the one that is in the repository, apt-get repository. So yeah, it's it's not that heavily outdated version, but it's not the latest one either. So if you want to install a more recent version, because I think the 4.01 came out recently, you might want to follow these instructions. So now let's check whether service Redis is running. So Redis server status, and we can also see that our Redis is running. So basically, we're just left with our final part before WordPress, and that is MySQL. For MySQL, there are many different choices that one can take. Basically, we can have the official one, which is kind of not used a lot because it's owned by Oracle, and they do have a reputation about their open source projects, which I'm not going to go into. So there are basically two alternatives, or drop-in replacements. A drop-in replacement means you can use you can use it in place of MySQL. It will work exactly the same. Well, it will work better, but the commands you use, the configurations you make, will be exactly the same. So what we can do now is, what I personally recommend is using the Persona. Persona is a highly optimized MySQL server. You could also use MariaDB. You could use even the official MySQL. Whichever works for you is perfectly fine. As you can see, they have instructions here, so I'll just basically copy paste them into our terminal. I don't know why, but when I paste this, there's this backslash here, and if you forget to remove it, then it will not work. So wait, before we do it, we might as well change and not do it in our Xim, but we'll do it in the root home directory, which is /root. So now we can actually get this Debian file. Sorry. And as following the official instructions, we need to do this. And let's check whether these commands updated our repository list files, and in fact they did. So you can see here did repositories on Persona for stretch. So now we do similar stuff that we did with Nginx and PHP. We do this. We update it so that everything gets into place, and finally we install Persona server, which is per this instruction. I will be asked for the password. I'll use webinar here, and I'll do it again, which is not very secure. So make sure that you choose a super secure password and store it somewhere. Yeah, so now that our Persona MySQL server is up and running, we need to do one last thing, and that is create a database for our WordPress and a user that will access it. So we're going into MySQL shell. For the password I entered webinar, as I said, and first let's create a database. And I'm using the following two character set and collation because they're most support for the widest range of characters, which is what you want in a CMS, especially one as popular as WordPress. So finally, we also need to create a user and grant them permissions to the database. Now also here I've created a password for the for WordPress user to be WordPress. This is also not very secure, so make sure you pick more secure ones. Once I do this, we're all set to start installing WordPress. Okay, so we will put our WordPress, as I said earlier, I'll use the nevermint.com domain for this webinar, and I usually tend to put into what is mostly accepted industry path for virtual host, which is in var www. So let's go to var and let's check whether the www is in. No. So what we need to do is we will create a folder, a directory called w/nevermint.com. So what I'm creating, P just means that it should create both if neither of them, because we don't have www. If we didn't use -p, then it would say there's no directory named www. With this, it just creates it, the full path, so to speak. So we're going to our directory, and as it stands, it's currently empty, of course. And now we need to download WordPress into this directory. We should go to the release archive and download the tar.gzip file. We'll just copy link address and we'll do wget, which would basically just pull the tar.gzip file onto the current directory. So if I check, it's in. So it's now time to uncompress it. I won't go into all the parameters, and as you can see, I'm not going into all commands. If you don't know what they do or what they mean, feel free to Google them. So in here, I can now see that we have WordPress, but I want all the files in this directory and not inside the WordPress. So let's just move all of them into current directory. So we just moved WordPress, asterisk mean anything that is in WordPress, into current directory. So if I do this, we still have our WordPress and our WordPress.tar.gz. We can remove them both without problem. So WordPress, and yeah, let's just do this. So they're gone now. So our files are now in place. But before we'll do anything with them, let's first create a new user. called a webmaster, and I'll explain shortly why. So the password, you can do whatever. I'll use webinar here, webinar, and I'll just skip all this because they're unnecessary. So we use webmaster as the owner of the files, which means that the Nginx and PHP running under www-data will only be part of the group that accesses the file. This does create a couple of problems, small ones, as you'll see going forward. Well, not problems, I would say inconveniences, because it's still better to have a little inconveniences in favor of a better security, overall security of our system. So we're sacrificing some of the inconvenience for increased security. Now, as the codex of WordPress, WordPress states, the department or the area for hardening WordPress, that you should run these two commands in order to set the right permissions. So let's run them now. So what I'll do now is I'll run the first one. Now it's a bit different, this command, from what codex says, because there's no full path, because I'm already in the directory I want to be. So find in the current directory, the type is directories. So find other directories and run chmod 755 on them, basically. It returns pretty fast because there's not many directories. And let's do the same for the files. It takes a bit longer because there's a bit more files, but the permissions are not correct. So final couple of things we need to do is we need to copy the sample, of course, config sample, or let's just move it rather than copy. Copy will leave the old one in place, but we don't need it. So we might as well just move it to wp-config.php. And what we want to do is we want to change permissions on WP config to 660. I won't explain what 660 means. There's a lot of documentation of how on how Linux permission system works. And finally, what I'll do is, as I said, we created webmaster user. So now what we'll do is I'll just own everything by the webmaster, and the group that will own the files and directories is called www-data. So if I do this now, if I check, everything is in order and the permissions are set correctly. Now, the first thing I always do when installing new WordPress sites is I disable cron, disable WordPress cron, that is, and enable the system level cron. And let me explain just for a short moment what's wrong with WordPress cron. If you do heavy caching on WordPress, then you most likely are serving, and I'll show this in shortly, is you're serving static files. WordPress isn't being called on a visit because our website is heavily cached, which means that if you have a very static WordPress website, you can go for days or at least hours with WordPress not being called at all. And if it's not called, then cron is not called either, and it's not doing its job. So it's much more reliable to do it via the system. But as our WordPress is owned by Webmaster, I need to switch to Webmaster now to set it up, to set up cron. So I just do su webmaster, and you can see that the shell looks different now because I'm operating under webmaster and not root anymore. So what I need to do now is just run cron tab -e that I want to set new, and it asks me what kind of editor do I want. I chose Vim, of course, because that's what I do. And finally, I'll paste in the following command, and as I said, we'll use nevermint.com here. Now, what's important here is basically just the first 5 space separated asterisks or whatever in those in place of those asterisks. Again, I urge you to Google how cron commands work, but this basically just means that we want to run anything that is following the asterisks every 15 minutes. So first is minutes, hours, and then we have months and days. And so what asterisks mean all the time, like you could do it, you know, if I replace this day of week is Sunday. So if I replace this asterisk with 0, it would just run it every 15 minutes on Sundays, basically. So once I'm done with this, I just quit it, and it says installing new cron tab, which means it will now run our cron or WordPress cron every 15 minutes. Now, of course, I need to disable WP cron in WP config. So we'll do WP config, and we're gonna disable it like this. And since we're already in this file, we might as well define all the database credentials and everything else that we need here for our WordPress to run. So our database is named WordPress. Our user is named WordPress user. Our password is also WordPress. Host is fine. We created this character set, if I recall correctly. Yes, we did. And we also need to define this collation that we actually changed to UTF-8 MV4 underscore Unicode CI. Perfect. So we're just basically using what we used in the command. And again, we won't go into details about these character set and collations, but you might want to Google them to what they mean. Now, finally, of course, we also need our salts in place. So let's see. Oh, it won't do it. I'm sorry about that. Let's do it a bit differently. Let's see if this version will do it. Maybe Vim is just messing with us a bit. So let's do, perfect. So we'll just, forgot one little tiny semicolon, and you know they can ruin your day. So let's go back into the file and just replace all this with this. Perfect. Everything seems to be in order. While we install WordPress, we also might want to change this to true, just in case. And now what I need to do, the final thing, actually there are two final things before we can visit WordPress, and that is we need to copy. We need to set up a basic Nginx configuration. So we're still using the system as a webmaster. Let's exit it back into root, and we go to Nginx configuration and create nevermint.com in my case. In your case, you're going to use another configuration, and I'll paste it in. I'll paste in the configuration that I have. Nevermint. I won't go through all the details. I'll just change my host name here. Okay, we don't have any more nevermints or examples for that matter. I'll share, actually I already created a Git repository in which you'll be able to get these files, so I don't go line by line explaining what I do. It's very similar to our default configuration, but it has a bit more settings, such as how big of a files we can upload, that we prevent people from running scripts inside the uploads directory, that we don't want to log favicon or robots, and so on and so forward. So that's it. I just created our virtual host. So now I also need to do the following thing. I'll need to go back into DigitalOcean and I actually have a floating IP ready. Think of a floating IP as one that is not attached to a particular droplet, but you can move it around, and it's useful for testing purposes. Because I don't need to go into my DNS provider always to change IPs. I already have one ready. So if I enable a floating IP, I can assign it. So for example, I can assign, unassign. I'll just assign this to a droplet, and I'll assign it to server 2, which we're on. So now I can also visit not just by the other IP, but by this IP. So I'm using the floating IP to access. So you can see here is one IP, and this is another IP, and I get the same thing back. What I did before the webinar is also I also configured my DNS provider that it points domain nevermint.com to this IP. So what we can do now is we can actually see whether, we'll see shortly whether all of it will be working properly. So yeah, let's try it. Let's first see whether it's correctly configured, Nginx, and then reload it. And the moment of truth, let's close this before we do. And now nevermint.com. Oh, yes, of course, it refuses to connect because we haven't configured HTTPS yet, which we'll do next. Well, not next, we have a couple of things to do. Okay, so let's try one more thing. Excuse me for that. This was something I didn't anticipate. And I'll open this in Firefox just to see. Not now. Yes, okay, so we can do it in Firefox, luckily. So our WordPress, yeah, it's currently not secure. So let's install it as intended. I'm sorry about that. Actually, I think that my Chrome has cached because I've done a certificate install previously. So what I'll do is I'll do nevermint here, and username, I'll use my username, and I'll quickly copy this to my notes that I'm making here as we go. There we go. And my email, and I'll also discard search engines to visit my website. Perfect. I can now log in. And ta-da! Our WordPress is now up and running. As I said earlier, the first thing I usually do is install Redis caching. So let's go to plugins and search for Redis cache. Redis cache. And when we try to install it, we get this window, this prompt, and we don't really want to do this every time. So let's save ourselves some time and actually hide this or configure our WordPress so that it's hidden and it does the work automatically. So again, we're going to do SU Webmaster because we are running our because Webmaster owns our WordPress. And what I'll do is I'll go to Webmaster's home directory, which is /home/webmaster. And then I'll create the necessary SSH or RSA keys. So I'll use these command to generate them. And I'll name it WP-RSA keys. There should be no passphrase. And the keys are here. You can see both of them, WP-RSA I if you follow this webinar at some later point, this is exactly how you have to do it. WordPress is very picky, or PHP about this. So if anything is off and not done exactly in this way, and trust me, I failed it many times, then it doesn't work. And the errors the WordPress returns are very, very vague and hard to understand. So what I'm doing now, just follow it straight through. And as I said, I'll have this command at the Git repo, so you'll be able to follow them. So we need to create an .ssh directory, and we'll move our public to the authorized keys. And what I'll also do is I'll modify the authorized keys to use 644 permissions. And what we also need to do is add from equals 2.7001. So it can only connect from itself. Save and quit. And we need to change the permissions on the .ssh to this. And now we can exit the webmaster user. Excuse me for a second. So the next thing we need to do is we also need to let WordPress know that we configured the keys. So what we need to do is go back to our WP config. Oh, sorry. Config, and paste the following in. So I've pasted from cron downwards. So the public key where it's saved, the private key, the user, we have no password because we didn't define any password. Passwords will bring all new issues. So yeah, this is the safest, fastest way I've learned to do it. So if I do it now, and if I reload here and install, it will just start installing. So it's by default using the proper keys. Everything is in order now. So you won't get any of those annoying pop-ups because everything has been set in WP config. Finally, of course, I'll activate the object cache, and let's see whether it actually works. Oh, it's activated the plugin, but it's not enabled yet. So I'll enable it. And voila, now our WordPress is saving transients into our Redis database. And we can verify that by running Redis CLI and just do keys and an asterisk to see whether there's anything in. And as you can see, there is stuff in. It's relatively minor right now because, yeah, it's a fresh install, but it can get huge, and it should get huge. This is all saved in memory, which means it's much faster than, say, MySQL, which is saved on disk. So I'll just quit out. And now what I'll do is something that we'll need later on, but it's important. It takes a while, so it's important that we do it right away. And we'll create what it's called a DH param file. We will use it for our SSL configuration, which we'll get to shortly, but it takes a couple of minutes, and I don't want to sit here and watch as the certificate is, or the PEM file is being generated. So we'll just generate it while or in a background. So what I'll do is I'll go into Nginx, and here what I'll do is 1 second. I'll create a new screen. A screen is basically just like you have this shell, and you can create or attach multiple screens. It's like having virtual screens inside your shell, basically. So what I'll do is I'll do screen minus big R, and I have a screen here. So you can see the screen looks differently. So it's like a separate shell, so to speak. It's a bit confusing, but as you use it, it becomes easier. Here, what I'll do is I'll run this command, which will start generating our DH, which is called Diffie-Hellman parameters or parameter file. And this is going to take a long time, as you can see here. Well, not that long, but it still takes, considerably long. So what I'll do here, I'll press Control A and D, and I got back into my old screen. This is a bit confusing. Just think of, you know, two screens, but one is hidden away, right? So what I can do is I can run screen -ls, and you can see that there's another screen running, but it's currently detached, right? Imagine your computer having two screens. You would disconnect one, but your computer wouldn't know, so it would still send, you know, picture to that screen. So it would be essentially detached. So the same is going on, well, similar principle is going on here. So if I want to go back, I can do screen -r, and I get back into that screen. So we'll do it then, Control A plus D, and I'm now detached. So we can continue while our DH param file is being generated. Okay, so the next thing we need to do, of course, we didn't create our uploads directory yet, so it's time to do our uploads directory. It's rather straightforward. Just create, oh, sorry, here, uploads, and yeah, we have to make sure, because I am creating it as root, and this is something you have to be careful about. Normally, you would be performing most of the things at webmaster, not as root, because you can forget things, and if you run as root, and then yeah, it lowers the security of the system. I've done it a lot of times. I still make mistakes, but I sometimes just do it as root because it's faster, and then switch to another user. Especially when you're setting up the system itself, it makes sense to run things as root. So what I'll need to do now is I need to change the ownership of the uploads to webmaster and the group www-data. And finally, since we need www-data to write to it, we need to change the permissions to be, you know, writable by both owner and the group. Because if you check the other ones, they don't have this W here. They have a minus, which means that www-data can't write to them. Perfect. Now it's time to install our second or our major player, so to speak, and that is WP Rocket. WP Rocket, as I said earlier, is a highly performance optimizing plugin for WordPress. It's on the Rocket. It's on. It's unfortunately not free. It costs $39, I think, for one website. Yeah, exactly, $39. However, it's worth much more than that. Actually, this is a bargain. And on top, I'll give you, at the end of this webinar, you'll get a discount for 20% off on any of these licenses. So I highly and heavily recommend using WP Rocket. I already downloaded WP Rocket, so what I'll do next is I'll go to plugins, and I'll upload it to the server directly. Upload plugin, and we have it here, and install WP Rocket. It'll take a minute to upload, or it will probably fail because I actually forgot something, and that is I forgot to change upload file sizes in PHP. Remember, we've done it in Nginx, but not in PHP. So let's go and fix that issue right now. So let's go and find the configuration file. It's here, and it's called php.ini. So ini, and let's search for upload. Next, I'm just searching for the word upload. I'm pressing N. Here we go. Let's do 20 megabytes. Of course, you can do anything you want. 20 megabytes is fine. At least for my use cases, you might want to go lower, might want to go higher. Post max size is 8 megabytes here. Now, most of the forms, we post them, so they need to match. So let's do 20 megabytes here as well. And while we're in this file, we also can increase the memory limit. Let's find this. Memory limit, it's set to 128. Let's increase that by 256. Perfect. So service, let's just see whether our plugin, oh, it succeeded, but still service PHP reload. Perfect. Let's just reload this page just to see whether, try again. Let's see, installed plugins. WP Rocket, let's activate it. And now you can see the inconveniences I was mentioning earlier. So WP Rocket can't write to advanced cache file. That is a good thing. That is a good thing because it means our web servers can't, or malicious visitors can't just write, or if they get some permissions, just change, configuration. Plugins, in my case, if something is ran through the web server, it's on the web, it should have limited permissions. But it also means we need to make sure, or we need to do it manually rather. So as you can see, WP content advanced cache file is unwritable. So let's go to WP content and let's do it ourselves. So we need a file called advanced cache. So let's do vim advanced cache.php, and let's paste. Let's paste this in. I'll just paste all of this in. Ta-da! Okay, everything seems to be in order. And what we also need to do, it says that it can't create WP content, WP Rocket config, cache, WP Rocket. So all these files, all these directories, we need to make them. So let's go ahead and just create them all in one swing. So WP Rocket config, cache, WP Rocket, cache min, and cache busting. We'll need all this. And now we need to apply these commands. Might seem a bit long. We're just making them on multiple directories at the same times. So what we need to do is change ownership again, because we're doing this as root. If I did it directly as webmaster, I could skip this step. And also let's change the writing permissions. This is a bit different notation than what you've seen earlier. It just means group can write. So add writing permission to the group. And this means recursively. So you can go as deep as the files go, really. So now if we refresh this page, ta-da, no more errors. This just means that our WP Rocket is working. Now to test it out, yes, I'm sure. Yes, I'm sure about this too. Yes, of course, I'm sure. You see how they warn you. So if I save changes now, I can check by going to nevermint.com in a private browsing, and I'll inspect the element. Or rather, let's just look at the source. You can see how it's all concatenated together. And there's this WP Rocket signature here. It means it's flying. You can close this. Okay, so our WordPress is now installed. Our WP Rocket is now up and running. Our Redis is running, but we will not stop there. In fact, there is an additional step we can and should and will make that will make this fly. And I'll explain the decision behind it soon. So what we need to do is let me explain how WP Rocket works first. It stores so once you visit a particular URL, it saves the file it generates into a folder, into a caching folder or directory, which means there's a static HTML file there that it serves when you visit WordPress. However, since plugin is written so well, we can also bypass WordPress completely and have Nginx serve those cache files directly, which is what we'll do next. It's actually not a long procedure, and what we need to do, what we will use actually, is we'll use this repository, which I'll paste later on. So basically, what it does is it creates Nginx config that we just include for us. So as per instructions here, we'll just follow the commands really. We'll go to Nginx, we'll clone the Nginx, the Rocket Nginx repository. We'll go into the repository and we'll copy the disabled file. So now what we'll do is, actually, I'll just check. Let's check what's inside. So you can see there's a template file, there's an ini or configuration file, and the parser itself. So what we'll do is I will modify the ini file, which is the configuration for this script, and I'll show you what it does soon. I'll just change SS. It has a value I don't need. You can leave this in if you know what. If you don't know, well, I would urge you to remove this include subdomains if you follow this webinar. At least at the beginning, include subdomains means it will require certificates on all the subdomains going forward. So if your main domain has a certificate with this kind of header, all the subdomains will need one, otherwise browsers will complain. So basically this allows you, of course it's more secure, but it's also less flexible, and for the purposes of, you know, building up a stack, this should be removed. But in the long run, of course, everybody should have, you know, certificates across the stack. So what I did is I removed it, and now what I'll just do is I'll just run the parser, and we end up with a default.conf. This default.conf, it means let's check it out actually. This default.conf is basically the Nginx configuration for our Rocket, WP Rocket speed improvement, and you can see where it's looking for the files. So yeah, I won't go into details. Feel free to look it up. Feel free to look up the repository and see the template file, which has an explanation of how it works. So what I need to do now basically is just go to my configuration, nevermind.com.conf, and just include it there. You can see here I have include, and I'll just do this, include the file itself, and I can do, now we need to do the config test and a reload. Perfect. Let's just make sure our Nginx is still working and everything is perfect. So what we can also do, Google page speed. Oh, sorry, not D, but Google is smart enough. So what we can run insights. Let's check it out. Not as yet. Nevermind.com. Let's see what Google has to say about it. See, perfect scores. Oh, almost perfect scores. There is no such thing as perfect. But without WP Rocket, those would be much lower. So with WP Rocket, I'm not getting paid to advocate for them. I really love it. It works, and a lot of website owners use it. So now that WP Rocket is all set, it's time for our final step, really. So it's fast now. How it works is that it's basically bypassing right now. If you visit nevermind.com or any of the pages, it's bypassing WordPress completely. Nginx sees the domain. It checks whether the files in the cache are there, and it serves them directly. There is no WordPress involved in most of these transactions, unless you're logged in, of course. Then it skips them. So that means it's really fast. It's like static websites. It's like Nginx serving static files. That's it. It's super powerful and it works. As simple as that. And Google loves you. What else could you ask for? So on to the final step. The next step, the final step, will be setting up HTTPS or the encryption of our of transfer. So we'll use of course Let's Encrypt, which is becoming the de facto standard. And unfortunately, I don't. Well, not unfortunately, I just don't like the official. Acme client that they use. I much prefer this dehydrated. It's called dehydrated, and it's quite popular actually. A lot of people use it. As you can see, how many stars it has. I've used it on many servers so far, and it has never failed me. So I urge you to give it a try. So now we need to basically create two directories, and I'll explain what these are. The second, of course, is the dehydrated configuration directory. Dehydrated, unfortunately, doesn't come as a package. We'll need to clone it, so we need to create some structure ourselves. And this Acme challenge basically will be used by Nginx because when you request a certificate, the Let's Encrypt servers ask your server, well, not your server, so the server you're asking the domain you're asking the certificate for, they try to contact it. So you need a virtual host and a directory for it, in which the dehydrated will reply to the Let's Encrypt server saying, hey, yes, this is us, right? Because Let's Encrypt is free, they need to automate this. So the verification is working like that. They ping, basically, in a way, they ping the domain or the server that is holding a particular domain. So we need this Acme challenge. Leave it empty and forget about it, but it needs to be there. Okay, so now what we'll do is we'll go into user/source. This directory is often used for sources you download, but not necessarily use all the time, or zip files or tar files or whatever. So I usually use them when I need to clone and I just need a part of something. So what I'll do is I'll clone the dehydrated package here. And let's go in. Now what we need to do is, if I run dehydrated, just like this, it won't find the command because it's not in path. And this is another point to make. So Linux uses what it's called a path. It's an environment variable that points to, so if I do ls, the command itself, the ls is somewhere in a directory, right? So if I do which ls, for example, it's alias to color. Let's do another which cat, for example. You can see that cat is stored in /bin/cat. So if I just write cat, how does the system know where to look? Well, it's stored in a path variable. So let's print it out to see the path variables. So you can see here there are colon delimited. So when you enter a command, it will look into these directories whether the command is actually in, and then execute it. So what we need to do basically, because dehydrated comes as a binary, as a program, so to speak, we need to put it, either copy it or symlink it. Symlink just means like a shortcut it basically. So what we'll do is I'll create a symlink. So I'll create a symlink, just pointing to this. So in here you can see there's a dehydrated binary here, and I just created a symlink. So basically this file is not an actual file; it just points to this file. Yeah, what we also need to copy for dehydrated is three configuration files that dehydrated works with, and those are in docs examples. We just need to move all these files to, or just copy these files to etc dehydrated. Let's go there then. We won't need this folder anymore. We'll leave it here. Directory, we'll need it here. Leave it here, but let's go back. So now we have our three files that dehydrated needs to run. And we need to change, we'll do a couple of changes. First, we need to change the domains. As you can see, that it can the dehydrated works like this. You can have as many domains as you want, and each row basically is one certificate, right? Because one certificate can cover a domain and multiple subdomains, right? But each subdomain, or sorry, each top-level domain needs to be on its own line. We're using just one domain, so I'll just do nevermind.com, but I could also do nevermind.com like this, although I'm not using the command at all, the subdomain, so we'll just use nevermind.com. Perfect. So we've configured our domains. Now let's go on to the config file. Let's check the config file, and in here, what we need to do is we need to first, and this is important, set the staging. We need to set the staging rather than production. So you can see here there's certificate authority field, and it's pointing to production, but it's uncommented. So of course, this is an example file, which is why everything is commented out. So let's do this. Basically, you can see that I just changed the difference between staging and the production is just the word staging versus VO1. The rest is pretty much the same. And same goes with the terms. We'll also have to accept the terms. And there's two more things we need to set in this file. One is called a well known. And we need to change this. We'll set it to Acme challenge. If I'm not mistaken. So this well-known, it's a bit, yeah, the naming is a bit off. Well-known, what does it mean? It just means the folder in which we need to serve let's encrypt, in which let's encrypt and dehydrated, or the Acme client will communicate through. And in our case, it's this one. But it's important that we memorize it because we'll need to set up a virtual host for it as well. So we only need one more thing, and that is contact email. Perfect. I know this was a bit hard to understand. I urge you to check the documentation for dehydrated. It has its own syntax, but compared to everything else, pretty much it's still simple. So now what we will do is we'll run dehydrated to see what we get. Okay, so sign renew certificates. So what we need to do is dehydrated -C. We get an error first, and it just means, okay, we didn't accept the terms. So what we need to run is this. Let's just copy paste it over. No need to complicate around it. Perfect. We did it. It works. So now, sorry, we just accepted terms. Let's try to generate the certificate. Okay. Let's see. Perfect. So our certificate is now in place. Now don't forget this, but our certificate is from staging environment. We connect it to staging. So if we configure the SSL to staging, it will not work. So we need to, now that we see that our setup works, we just need to say, switch to production. So let's just vim config, and let's just comment this one, and like this, we just switch these two basically. You don't want to delete, I mean, you can delete it, but leave it there just in case you have to, do some trial and error going forward, that you have them handy. Perfect. Now we can also, before we proceed, we can also check something else. Remember this? Perfect. So our screen did complete creating the dhparam file. It took quite a while, but here it is, and it's perfect. Well, it is what it is. So finally, we can exit this shell, and we'll get back into that. So we exited the screen. We don't need it anymore. It's working, and the timing is perfect. So we have we've switched to production, so let's do dehydrated again. We need to do this again. So now we need to accept the terms on production. So we just need to run it again. Perfect. So now let's try this. The certificate is there, but again, don't get fooled by this. The certificate is staging. So if I do dehydrated, there's an option called ors, and it's -x. So let's do -c -x. Let's wait. Perfect. We now have production ready certificates for our WordPress website. Now, finally, we don't want to do that all the time. So what we want to do is call our old friend cron and put in the command that will do it for us. I use this version. You may choose to do timing differently. This version just does runs the dehydrated to renew every Sunday at midnight, basically once a week. Once a week is enough because Let's Encrypt certificates are valid for 3 months. Most of the time it will just skip renew because it won't be expired yet, but as a certain threshold is passed, it will start renewing them. So cron tab is now installed and we have our certificates in place. Now, finally, what we need to do, of course, is go to our Nginx virtual host file. This is nevermint.com.conf. And again, I'll just paste in some configuration because I don't want to bore you with typing it out. So as you can see here, now I have 2 virtual hosts defined, 2 server blocks in. Why? Because we only need the port 80, the non-SSL one, just to be there to redirect people to our SSL or our HTTPS version. And the second important thing is this one. So you can see the location for the Acme challenge. So if you remember earlier, I said, let's create this file. This is where it is defined. And it's been defined all along in our previous version of this file as well. So alias is that it should serve whatever is in that file, directory. And what it is in that directory at the time of renewal is what dehydrated puts in, which is some sort of token. And I don't know how it works, honestly. Magic. Anyway, what we need to do here, just never mint. Let's just change example, never mint. Oops. Never mint. Oh, I forgot an end there. And like this. So I think we got them all. Yes, we got them all. No more examples. So I'll show you this. As I said, I do have this in a repository. You will be able to look at this code. It's basically what I found on the Mozilla website. Mozilla had this nifty generator we can use, and it creates for Nginx. It creates what we need. Well, not all of it, but regarding certificates. So it has all the necessary ciphers. It has all the necessary files, settings. Everything is there. It's there perfectly. It works. So most of it I just copied. So what I did is I used our first version of our virtual host file with this, combined it with this, and this is the result. As you can see here, oops, sorry, I don't know why this didn't work earlier. Line 83, you can see here that we do include our Diffie-Hellman parent file. So it is there, and it takes about 5 to 10 minutes to generate, which is why we did it in the background. Perfect. I think we're all set to try our SSL certificate. Let's see if our Nginx is okay. Oh, config test, sorry. Perfect, and let's reload it. Perfect. Now let's see if our never mint will work. Ah, nice. So you can see it works. So let's go to our admin and let's paste in our username and password. Login. And perfect. What we need to do is settings, general, and just fix this here to say HTTPS and save. Of course, we got out. Let's say never mint. Perfect. So you can see here now, if I click around, things are really responsive. Well, unfortunately, I don't have any contents to show you how fast it works, but trust me, this is, compared to many sites out there, insanely fast. And that's all there is to it, really. We've taken an hour and 45 minutes. I would thank you for your patience. If you have any questions, now would be the time. Thank you. Oh, and before I let you go, of course, I forgot one more thing, and that is to share my coupons with you. I almost forgot. How bad of me. So of course there are coupons you can use for WP Rocket and DigitalOcean. So for DigitalOcean, use codable DO codable 15. That's for $15 coupon on DigitalOcean, and for WP Rocket for 20% off any license. Use the code SPEED WP20. And finally, I also have to share this with you, which are instructions. Basically, I follow them right now because it took me a while to build all this, and it wouldn't last just shy of 2 hours if I did it from scratch. So feel free to visit the instructions here and just follow them through and raise an issue if you have any kind of problems at all. That's it. Thank you. I'm reading through the question to answer them now. Of course, I can run it through Google speed test again. Let me do it while we're here. So speed tests like this. I'll just open this. So it's perfect. Like I can put the HTTPS here or leave it. Also, one thing I'm proud of usually, I'm happy that it is like it is the fact that with this Nginx configuration, the quality of the certificate is A+. So yes, that is a good thing to have. So you have fast website, it's optimized for page speed, and the quality of the certificate is A+. Now this will take a while, so I'm going to read through a couple of other questions that are there. We have a question about whether this is a setup we're currently using on Codable's site, and the answer is no. Actually, I've been testing, and yeah, I've been testing our live site on something new. Actually, we're testing Codable on Kubernetes, which means it has multiple servers all serving the same WordPress. It's not working as I would want it to work. So the question will become yes. Rather soon. So that's the answer. Let's wait for a couple more seconds. I think we can stop the recording here at this point, and I'll be around for more questions. I'll just stop the recording.